As the cabin grew silent, Jasmine Washington calmly reached into her bag and produced her Federal Aviation Administration credentials. "I'm ordering an immediate flight audit," she said evenly. The pilot, the same man who had demanded she vacate her first-class seat minutes earlier, turned pale. Jasmine hadn't intended to reveal her position today, but blatant racism left her no choice. Before we unpack this shocking confrontation at 30,000 feet, drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe equal treatment isn't optional. It's a right. Now buckle up, because what happened next changed the airline industry forever. Jasmine Washington settled into seat 3A, sliding her designer briefcase beneath the seat in front of her. At 42, the senior FAA safety inspector had earned every stitch of the tailored navy pantsuit that framed her deep brown skin. Her natural hair was pulled into a neat bun, pearl studs at her ears, and her grandmother's watch on her wrist. Professional, polished, exhausted. 3 grueling airport inspections in 48 hours had left her drained. This flight, Delta 2576, Atlanta to Chicago, was supposed to be 2 hours of much-needed rest. She'd even cashed in miles for a first-class upgrade. "Welcome aboard," Flight Attendant Heather Bailey said warmly. Jasmine smiled back. "Sparkling water with lime, please." The first-class cabin filled quickly. Wide leather seats, glassware instead of plastic, and an air of quiet privilege. A white businessman in his 50s, Tyler Crawford, took the seat beside her, offering a polite nod after a brief flicker of surprise. Jasmine knew that look. The subtle calculation people made when they saw a black woman in a space they didn't expect her to occupy. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Maxwell, 58, prepared for departure. His record was clean, but whispers about his old-school views floated among crew. His first officer, Derek Johnson, a black pilot in his mid-30s, ran checks beside him, occasionally glancing through the open door at boarding passengers. Jasmine overheard a snippet from the flight attendants. "How was diversity training?" one asked. Heather rolled her eyes. "The usual. Some of the senior guys acted like it was punishment. Maxwell walked out halfway, said he had simulator time." "Figures," her colleague muttered. Jasmine sipped her water, face neutral. She'd seen dozens of Captain Maxwells in her career, men who treated diversity as an inconvenience, not a necessity. But tonight, she told herself, she wasn't here to work. The plane pushed back. Passengers buckled in. Then Captain Maxwell stepped into the cabin. His sharp gaze swept the rows before pausing on Jasmine. He frowned. A moment later, Heather approached Jasmine's seat, her professional smile strained. "Excuse me, ma'am. There seems to be a seating issue. The captain believes you may have been upgraded by mistake." "There's no mistake," Jasmine replied calmly, handing over her boarding pass. "This is my confirmed seat." Heather nodded. "It checks out." Before she could finish, Maxwell appeared. His voice carried across the cabin. "There's been a computer error. We need this seat for another passenger." Jasmine glanced around the full cabin. No one was waiting for a seat. "I don't see anyone needing it. And my upgrade was confirmed weeks ago." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "As captain, I have final authority. You'll need to move to economy so we can depart." The businessman beside her shifted uncomfortably. "Her ticket seems valid," he spoke up. Maxwell ignored him, eyes locked on Jasmine. "Ma'am, I need you to comply." She met his stare, heart pounding but voice steady. "I decline. My seat is confirmed. No valid reason has been given for your request." The cabin grew tense, phones lifted discreetly, recording. Maxwell's tone hardened. "Either move voluntarily, or I'll involve security." From the cockpit doorway, First Officer Johnson watched, his expression conflicted. "Are you refusing crew instructions?" Maxwell pressed. "I am refusing an unjustified and discriminatory order," Jasmine replied evenly. The captain's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes," Jasmine said. "It is." She hadn't planned to pull rank, but when justice was on the line, silence wasn't an option. Her mind flashed back to an 8-year-old girl pressed against the window of a Boeing 737, whispering to her mother, "I'm going to work with airplanes someday." That little girl had grown into one of the FAA's most influential safety inspectors, a woman whose audits could ground entire fleets, reshape industry standards, and end careers. Her path had been forged through her parents' sacrifices, years of balancing college with flight attendant shifts, and the steady mentorship of Franklin Donahue, who once told her, "Sometimes you save your cards for bigger battles. Sometimes showing them is the only way to change the game." At 30,000 feet, Jasmine knew exactly which choice lay before her. Tomorrow's inspection in Chicago would probably be routine. She had planned to review her notes that evening, brief her team, and rest. But now, faced with Captain Maxwell demanding she vacate her rightful first-class seat, her mentor's words echoed louder than ever. She had lived through countless moments like this, the skeptical glances at her credentials, the assumptions that she was in the wrong room, wrong role, wrong seat. Early on, she fought back with anger, then with painstaking explanations. Eventually, she learned the strength of calm precision. Emotional reactions, however justified, only fed the doubts of those determined not to see her authority. This was more than a personal insult. She was leading an inspection on equitable passenger treatment, a mission born from recent high-profile cases of discrimination. And now, irony had placed her in the very situation her team was investigating. Jasmine had always believed in tackling systems, not individuals. But systems were built of individuals, and sometimes the only way to expose them was through one pointed stand. Maxwell loomed over her, insisting she comply. She remained seated, steady, heart racing. "Captain," she said evenly, "I have a valid first-class ticket. Your request appears discriminatory, and I'm documenting this interaction." His jaw tightened. "Final chance to comply voluntarily. Otherwise, I'll involve security." Flight attendant Heather hesitated, then reached for the cabin phone. Uneasy passengers filmed the exchange. Beside Jasmine, businessman Tyler Crawford spoke up. "This is ridiculous. She has a confirmed seat. What's the problem here?" Minutes later, Security Officer Walter Green boarded, calm but firm. Maxwell claimed she refused seating instructions. Jasmine presented her boarding pass. Green examined it, nodded, and returned it. "Her documentation is in order." Maxwell bristled. "As captain, I have ultimate authority. This is a security matter." "What specific concern?" Green pressed. Maxwell faltered. "That's operational information." From across the aisle, an elderly woman broke the silence. "I've flown first class for 40 years and never seen anything like this. Shameful." Murmurs spread through the cabin. Maxwell tried again, cloaking bias in coded language about standards in premium cabins. Officer Green's expression hardened. "Captain, unless you can cite a clear safety issue, this is customer service, not security." Pushed to the brink, Maxwell threatened, "Remove her, or I'll declare her a flight risk. She'll go on the restricted flyer list." The tension was electric. Phones filmed. Passengers whispered, and Jasmine knew the moment had come. She reached into her handbag, withdrew a leather credential wallet, and handed it to Officer Green. His eyes widened as he read aloud, Federal Aviation Administration. The cabin fell silent. Every eye focused on the small leather wallet being returned to Jasmine's hand. Jasmine Washington rose from her seat, standing at her full height of 5'8" in. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of federal authority rather than that of a contested passenger. I'm Senior Safety Inspector Jasmine Washington, Federal Aviation Administration, she announced clearly. Based on what I've witnessed, I am officially initiating an unscheduled operational safety audit of this flight, with particular focus on crew decision-making protocols and passenger treatment standards. Captain Maxwell's face drained of color so rapidly that for a moment he appeared ill. First Officer Johnson, still standing near the cockpit, straightened his posture instinctively. This is Maxwell began, then faltered. A legitimate exercise of FAA oversight authority. Jasmine completed for him, her tone professional rather than triumphant. Officer Green, would you please notify your supervisor that we'll need access to the security office for initial documentation? I'll also need the airline's ground operations manager on site immediately. Green nodded, professional training overriding his surprise. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Maxwell found his voice, though it had lost its commanding edge. This is an unnecessary delay. I was simply following standard protocols, for we'll document exactly which protocols were followed. Jasmine interrupted crisply. Every airline operating in U.S. airspace is required to provide specific, non-discriminatory reasons for any passenger receding request. I didn't hear any such reason provided, but perhaps it exists in your documentation. She removed her phone and dialed a number from memory. This is Washington, authorization code, Sierra Tango 947. I'm initiating an unscheduled operational safety audit on Delta Flight 2576 at Atlanta International. I'll require immediate access to all flight documentation and crew records. Throughout the cabin, reactions varied wildly. Some passengers appeared confused, others relieved. Several had their phones raised, still recording. Tyler Crawford wore an expression of stunned respect, while Margaret Foster nodded with grim satisfaction. Heather, the flight attendant, approached cautiously. Ms. Washington, what should we tell the passengers about the delay? The truth, Jasmine replied. This flight is undergoing a standard FAA safety audit before departure. All passengers will be updated about timing once we've completed the initial assessment. First Officer Johnson stepped forward. Inspector Washington, as the secondary pilot, should I begin gathering the flight documentation you'll need? Yes, please, Jasmine confirmed. I'll need the complete flight manifest, crew assignment records, maintenance logs, and all pre-flight safety checks. Maxwell remained frozen. His authority suddenly evaporated. The power dynamic had shifted completely, leaving him visibly struggling to process the reversal. This is, he began again. Standard procedure, Jasmine supplied. FAA inspectors are empowered to conduct unscheduled audits whenever safety concerns arise. Discriminatory treatment of passengers constitutes such a concern as it indicates potential impairment of crew judgment. A suited woman hurried down the jetway and onto the plane. Sandra Alvarez, the airline's regional operations director, alerted it by the ground crew about the unfolding situation. Inspector Washington, she said, extending her hand professionally. I understand there's a situation requiring FAA intervention. Yes, Director Alvarez. We'll need to move this discussion off the aircraft, Jasmine replied, gathering her belongings. Captain Maxwell will need to be temporarily relieved while we conduct initial interviews. Standard procedure for an operational audit. Of course. Alvarez agreed immediately, shooting Maxwell a look that combined warning with disbelief. We'll arrange for a replacement captain immediately. Maxwell finally found words. This is an overreaction to a simple seating misunderstanding. Jasmine turned to him, her expression neutral but firm. Captain, every interaction between crew and passengers is subject to federal safety regulations which explicitly prohibit discriminatory treatment. You demanded I relocate without providing any valid operational reason, then threatened security action when I requested justification. That's not a misunderstanding. It's a potential violation of FAA regulations. Passengers, we apologize. For the delay, Sandra Alvarez announced to the cabin, "This flight is currently undergoing an FAA safety review. We'll provide updates as soon as possible, and compensation vouchers will be issued for the inconvenience." As Jasmine moved toward the exit, escorted by Alvarez and Officer Green, she paused beside First Officer Johnson. "I'll need your observations, as well once we've established the preliminary documentation." Johnson nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll cooperate fully." Maxwell watched helplessly as his career began unraveling before his eyes, all because he couldn't accept that a black woman belonged in first class, not realizing she belonged in a position of authority far beyond his own. The airport conference room rapidly transformed into an impromptu investigation headquarters. Jasmine sat at the head of the glossy table, systematically organizing documents as they arrived. Her FAA laptop was open, connected to the AY's secure database as she logged the official audit initiation. Sandra Alvarez, the airline's regional director, sat tensely to her right. Across from them, a hastily summoned airline legal representative named Martin Freridman adjusted his tie repeatedly, clearly unprepared for a Saturday crisis. "To be clear," Jasmine stated, her tone methodical, "this audit is now examining two separate issues: the specific incident involving Captain Maxwell's conduct and the broader pattern it may represent within your airline's culture. We take allegations of discrimination extremely seriously," Alvarez began, her corporate training evident in the careful phrasing. "I'm not making allegations," Jasmine corrected. "I'm documenting observed behaviors that potentially violate Federal Aviation regulations. Regarding equitable passenger treatment." Officer Green entered with a sealed envelope. "The security camera footage you requested, Inspector Washington." "Thank you," she replied, signing the chain of custody form. The door opened again, admitting First Officer Derek Johnson, his uniform crisp, but his expression troubled. Captain Maxwell had been escorted to a separate room where he awaited questioning with a pilot's union representative. "First Officer Johnson," Jasmine acknowledged, "please sit down. I need your candid observations of today's incident, as well as any relevant historical context regarding Captain Maxwell's interactions with passengers." Johnson hesitated, career preservation instincts visibly conflicting with professional integrity. "Your testimony is protected under federal whistleblower statutes." Jasmine reminded him, "No retaliatory action can legally be taken based on truthful statements made during an official safety audit." Johnson straightened. "Today's incident wasn't isolated. Inspector, I've flown with Captain Maxwell for 3 years. During that time, I've observed at least 7 similar situations involving passengers of color in premium cabins." Alvarez inhaled sharply, while the lawyer scribbled urgent notes. "Were these incidents reported?" Jasmine asked, already suspecting. The answer: "Yes," Johnson confirmed. "I personally reported 2. Several flight attendants reported others. To my knowledge, no substantive action was ever taken." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. "We'll need access to those reports." "There's more," Johnson continued. "Commitment to truth, now overriding caution. Last month, during our required diversity training session, Captain Maxwell walked out halfway through. When questioned later, he told several colleagues it was political correctness, nonsense that interfered with real safety priorities. Jasmine methodically documented each statement, building the framework of a case that was expanding beyond one incident into a pattern of institutional failure. The next 3 hours proceeded with grim efficiency. Flight attendant Heather Bailey provided her account, followed by 2 others from the flight crew. Each testimony reinforced the emerging pattern. Maxwell's behavior was known, reported, and consistently overlooked by management. "We've accessed Captain Maxwell's service record," Jasmine informed Alvarez, turning her laptop to display the file. "In the past 5 years, there have been 11 documented passenger complaints regarding his conduct, 9 involving passengers of color. Each was dismissed as unsubstantiated or resolved through passenger compensation." Alvarez's professional composure cracked slightly. "I wasn't aware of." "That's precisely the problem," Jasmine interrupted. "As regional director, you should have been notified of any pattern of complaints against flight crew, particularly command personnel. The fact that you weren't suggests a systemic failure in your reporting procedures. The airline's damage control machinery had fully activated by now. Vouchers were being distributed to delayed passengers, and a replacement captain, Elizabeth Chen, a veteran pilot with an exemplary record, had been assigned to the flight. "We'll need to interview Captain Maxwell now," Jasmine stated, gathering her materials. "But first, I want to review the passenger receipting statistics from the past 2 years. The data request sent Freridman into fresh anxiety. That's proprietary, operational information which federal regulators have complete access to under Statute 49, CFR, Part 119, Jasmine completed for him. The request has already been submitted through proper channels. While we wait, let's proceed with Maxwell's interview." The room arranged for Maxwell's interview contained only a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device. The captain sat stiffly beside Craig Palmer, the pilot's union representative. Maxwell's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by defensive weariness. "This proceeding is being recorded as part of Federal Aviation Administration Safety Audit Number ATL 23047, Jasmine stated for the record. "Present are Captain Richard Maxwell, Union Representative Craig Palmer, Airline Legal Counsel Martin Freridman, and Senior FAA Inspector Jasmine Washington." She placed Maxwell's service record on the table between them. "Captain Maxwell, I'd like to discuss the incident that occurred today on Flight 2576, as well as several previous passenger interactions noted in your file. I was following company procedures regarding passenger management," Maxwell stated flatly. "Please specify which procedure instructed you to request that I vacate my confirmed first-class seat without providing any valid operational reason." Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. "There was a security concern." "What specific security concern?" "I'm not required to disclose security assessments to passengers." "You are, however, required to document them," Jasmine countered, sliding a form across the table. "This is the standard security action report that must be completed whenever security concerns prompt crew intervention. It appears no such form was filed before you approached me." Palmer, the union representative, winced slightly. "Furthermore," Jasmine continued, "FAA regulation requires that any passenger receipting based on security concerns must be documented with specific observable behaviors that prompted the action. Simply stating, security concern without documentation constitutes regulatory non-compliance." Maxwell's defense crumbled further when confronted with statistics hastily compiled by the airline's data team. Over the past 24 months, passengers of color holding first-class tickets on his flights were 7 times more likely to be requested to relocate than white passengers with identical ticket classifications. This pattern suggests decisions based on criteria other than legitimate operational concerns, Jasmine noted, her tone remaining professional despite the damning evidence before them. By early evening, the investigation had expanded well beyond Maxwell. 3 other captains with similar complaint patterns had been identified. Flight attendant interviews revealed an unwritten culture of compliance with captains' requests, even when they contradicted company non-discrimination policies. What had begun as one woman refusing to surrender her seat was evolving into a comprehensive examination of systemic discrimination within the airline's operations, precisely the issue Jasmine's team had been tasked with addressing across the industry. As she reviewed the preliminary findings, Jasmine felt no triumph, only grim confirmation of what many black travelers already knew from bitter experience. The difference now was that this experience had happened to someone with the authority to demand institutional accountability. The airline's corporate headquarters had dispatched their senior vice president of operations overnight. Howard Phillips, a silver-haired executive with 30 years in the industry, sat at the conference table surrounded by legal counsel, HR directors, and public relations specialists. Their expressions ranged from concerned to calculating as they faced Jasmine and her team of 3 FAA colleagues who had arrived early that morning. Inspector Washington Phillips began with practiced cordiality. "We want to thank you for bringing these concerns to our attention. We're prepared to address the specific incident with appropriate disciplinary action against Captain Maxwell." Jasmine allowed a moment of silence before responding. "Mr. Phillips, while Captain Maxwell's behavior initiated this audit, our preliminary findings indicate a much broader pattern requiring systemic rather than individual remediation." She opened a folder containing the overnight analysis. "In the past 36 months, your airline has processed 217 complaints alleging discriminatory treatment. 84% were resolved with vouchers or miles, 12% with form letters denying any discrimination occurred, and 4% received no response at all. 0% resulted in documented disciplinary action or procedural changes." Phillips maintained his corporate smile, though it tightened at the corners. "We take all passenger concerns seriously." "The data suggests otherwise," Jasmine interrupted, sliding a graph across the table. "This analysis shows a statistically significant disparity in how passengers of color are treated during service recovery situations, upgrade processing, and in-flight service incidents. Most concerning is this cluster regarding receding requests initiated by flight crew. The graph showed an unmistakable pattern. Black passengers holding first-class tickets were approximately 6 times more likely to be asked to relocate than white passengers with identical bookings. These could be coincidental correlations, suggested Rebecca Torres, the airline's chief legal officer. "Correlation doesn't imply causation." "True," agreed Jason Bennett, the FAA statistical analyst who had joined Jasmine's team, "which is why we conducted a multivariate regression analysis controlling for timing of bookings, frequent flyer status, and check-in procedures. The racial disparity remained consistent across all controlled variables." Phillips's smile had completely vanished. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Jasmine replied calmly. "I'm presenting documented evidence of a pattern that violates federal aviation regulations regarding equitable passenger treatment. This pattern extends beyond Captain Maxwell to multiple crew members and appears to be enabled by management practices that consistently failed to address documented complaints." The executives exchanged glances as the scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't going to be resolved with a single termination or the usual damage control. The conference room door opened as First Officer Johnson arrived, having been summoned for additional testimony. He stood straight back despite the obvious career risk of speaking against a senior captain in company practices. First Officer Johnson has provided written documentation of previous incidents similar to the one I experienced, Jasmine explained. His testimony suggests that reporting procedures systematically buried discrimination complaints rather than addressing them. I reported 3 specific incidents over the past year, Johnson stated firmly. Each involved Captain Maxwell or other senior pilots requesting that passengers of color relocate from premium cabins without valid operational reasons. Each report disappeared into what we call the administrative black hole. Flight attendant Heather Bailey had also provided a written statement now projected onto the screen at the front of the room. We were informally instructed to comply with captain requests regarding passenger seating without question. When I expressed concerns about potentially discriminatory patterns, my supervisor advised me to focus on service delivery, not social justice. As morning stretched into afternoon, the evidence mounted. Additional crew members came forward. Protection of whistleblower statutes emboldening those who had previously feared career repercussions. Passenger complaints were retrieved from the airline's customer service database, many containing eerily similar descriptions of experiences like Jasmine's. By 3 E's, the airline executive strategy had shifted from denial to damage control. We're prepared to implement immediate corrective actions, Phillips announced. Captain Maxwell will be placed on administrative leave pending review and will conduct comprehensive retraining for all flight crews that addresses symptoms, not causes, Jasmine replied. Our audit has identified systemic failures in your reporting structure, complaint resolution procedures, and accountability mechanisms. Retraining without structural change merely creates the appearance of action without meaningful reform. She laid out the regulatory consequences, substantial fines, mandatory external monitoring, and potential restrictions on route expansions until compliance was verified. Alternatively, she continued, you can work with the FAA to implement a comprehensive remediation plan addressing the root causes identified in our audit. This would include restructuring your complaint investigation procedures, implementing transparent accountability metrics for crew members with pattern violations, and establishing an independent passenger advocacy office with direct reporting to executive leadership. The negotiation continued for hours, corporate resistance gradually giving way to the weight of evidence and regulatory authority. By evening, the framework of an action plan had emerged, one that would address not just Maxwell's behavior, but the institutional culture that had enabled it. Captain Maxwell was brought in toward the end, now represented not just by the pilots' union, but personal legal counsel as well. His defense had shifted from denial to deflection. I've served this airline for 25 years with an exemplary safety record, he insisted. My actions have always been guided by professional judgment, not bias. Jasmine met his gaze steadily. Captain, the data tells a different story. Your professional judgment has demonstrably different outcomes based on passenger demographics. That pattern exists across multiple flights, multiple years, and multiple witnesses. Maxwell's facade finally cracked. The standards were different when I started flying. Now everyone's so sensitive about everything. Aviation standards evolved constantly, Jasmine replied. Pilots who insisted on maintaining outdated navigation practices despite new technology would be removed from service. Safety culture requires adaptation to new understanding, including recognition that equitable treatment is not sensitivity, it's a regulatory requirement. As the meeting concluded, Phillips approached Jasmine privately. This could have been handled with discretion. You've created a situation that may damage the entire airline's reputation. Jasmine gathered her documents calmly. Mr. Phillips, I didn't create this situation. I merely experienced and documented it. The damage to your reputation began long before I boarded that flight. With every passenger who experienced discrimination and wasn't believed, every complaint that was buried, every employee who was told to prioritize hierarchy over equity, I'm simply making visible what was already there. She left him standing in the conference room, surrounded by the evidence of systems that had failed not just her, but countless passengers before her. The boarding process for the rescheduled Delta Flight 2576 proceeded with unusual care. Passengers who had chosen to wait rather than accept rebooking on other flights now moved through the jetway, many exchanging knowing glances or whispered comments about the previous day's events. Several smartphone videos of the confrontation had already accumulated thousands of views online, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Jasmine Washington returned to seat 3A, her FAA credentials now securely tucked away. She had no desire to trade on her authority. She simply wanted what every passenger deserved: safe, respectful transport to her destination. Captain Elizabeth Chin stood at the cockpit door, personally greeting passengers as they boarded. An unusual but welcome gesture after the previous day's tensions. At 52, Chen was a veteran pilot with an exemplary service record spanning 27 years. "Welcome aboard," she greeted each passenger warmly. When Jasmine reached the threshold, Chen extended her hand with professional respect. "Inspector Washington, thank you for your patience with the delay. We're honored to have you aboard." The acknowledgement was subtle, but meaningful recognition of Jasmine's position without creating spectacle. Sandra Alvarez, the airline's regional director, had personally overseen the crew reassignment and passenger service recovery. She approached Jasmine once boarding completed. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of the airline, I want to personally apologize for yesterday's incident. Your first-class accommodation has been upgraded to our premium service level, and we've ensured this flight exceeds all service standards." "Thank you," Jasmine replied simply, "but I hope equal care is being taken with all passengers regardless of their professional position or influence." Alvarez nodded soberly. "That's precisely what the new protocols are designed to ensure." First Officer Johnson had been retained for the flight. As Jasmine settled in, he stopped briefly beside her seat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've done what many of us couldn't." Heather, also continuing her assigned duties, served Jasmine with special attention. When presenting her pre-flight beverage, she whispered simply, "Thank you for standing your ground. It matters." Tyler Crawford, the businessman who had spoken up during the confrontation, found himself seated beside Jasmine once again. "I've flown over 2 million miles, he commented, as the plane prepared for takeoff. "I've seen situations like yesterday's more times than I can count. But I've never seen anyone in a position to actually change the system. Most of us just document it, report it, then watch nothing happen. The system only changes when enough people refuse to accept its failures," Jasmine replied. "My company's implementing new travel policy guidelines next quarter," Crawford added. "After yesterday, I'll be pushing to include ethical treatment metrics in our airline selection criteria." Throughout the cabin, Jasmine noticed subtle differences in crew behavior: more consistent eye contact with all passengers, more careful attention to individual needs, regardless of appearance or attire. The atmosphere held a deliberate inclusivity that shouldn't have felt remarkable, but did. Midway through the flight, Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally thank you for your patience with yesterday's delay. At Delta, we're committed to ensuring every passenger receives respectful, equitable service on every flight. We appreciate your understanding as we work to deliver on that promise." The statement wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of what had occurred, but its implication was clear to everyone who had witnessed or heard about the previous day's events. Margaret Foster, the elderly woman who had spoken up during the confrontation, stopped by Jasmine's seat on her way to the lavatory. "I've been flying since the days when they served 5-course meals on China," she remarked. "I've watched policies change, uniforms change, menus change, but some attitudes remain stubbornly fixed. Perhaps that's finally changing too." Jasmine's phone occasionally lit up with notifications. Colleagues from the FAA sending messages of support as news of the incident spread through aviation channels. Heard what happened. About time, someone with authority experienced it firsthand. Change is coming. Franklin called, says you knew exactly when to show your cards. Well done. The flight landed in Chicago on schedule. As passengers prepared to depart, Jasmine noticed a young black flight attendant watching her with barely contained emotion. When Jasmine reached the exit, the young woman spoke softly. "Inspector Washington, my name is Tanya. I just wanted to say you've changed things for us. Things we couldn't change ourselves." Jasmine nodded, understanding the full weight of those words. Individual courage could create openings for systemic change, but only if that courage was backed by positional authority and institutional accountability. She had possessed both, something too many others experiencing discrimination did not. As she walked through O'Hare International Airport toward her hotel, Jasmine knew that tomorrow's scheduled safety inspection would proceed with additional scrutiny. The incident had illustrated precisely why the FAA's new equity compliance initiatives were necessary and why they required rigorous enforcement. One flight, one stand, one audit wouldn't transform an entire industry, but it had created a visible crack in a system that had too long protected itself from accountability. And sometimes a crack was all that was needed for structural change to begin. 3 months after the incident that aviation industry insiders now simply called the audit, Jasmine Washington sat before the Congressional Transportation Oversight Committee. Camera flashes punctuated the otherwise solemn atmosphere as she prepared to testify about the systemic changes implemented across multiple airlines following her confrontation with Captain Maxwell. Inspector Washington began. Congresswoman Eleanor Barnes, committee chair. "Would you please summarize for this committee the findings of the comprehensive review your team conducted and the resulting industry-wide reforms?" Jasmine adjusted the microphone. "Our investigation revealed patterns of discriminatory passenger treatment that extended well beyond a single incident or airline. Following our initial findings, we expanded our audit to 17 major carriers and identified statistically significant disparities in how passengers of color were treated across multiple service categories, particularly regarding seating in premium cabins." The hearing room remained silent as Jasmine outlined the sweeping changes now being implemented. Mandatory blind review processes for passenger complaints, removal of flight crew discretion for passenger reseating except in documented safety emergencies, and independent oversight committees with direct reporting to both airline leadership and FAA regulators. Captain Richard Maxwell had taken early retirement rather than face disciplinary proceedings. While the airline had carefully framed his departure as unrelated to the audit, industry insiders recognized the connection. More importantly, his case had sparked uncomfortable but necessary conversations throughout the aviation community about unconscious bias and its impact on passenger safety and dignity. Following the hearing, Jasmine reviewed the preliminary statistics from the first quarter under the new protocols. Discriminatory reseating incidents had decreased by 78% across participating airlines. Complaint resolution processes had been standardized and transparentized with quarterly public reporting requirements. First Officer Derek Johnson had received his 4 stripes, promoted to captain 2 months after the incident. His first official communication in his new position had been a brief email to Jasmine. Command decisions reflect values. Thank you for showing us better ones. Flight attendant Heather Bailey had accepted a position on her airline's newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, bringing frontline perspective to policy development. Her initial recommendation that all passenger reseating requests be documented with specific non-discriminatory justifications had been adopted as standard procedure across the industry. The business impact had proven significant as well. Corporate fee. Travel policies increasingly incorporated equity metrics and airline selection criteria, influenced partly by executives like Tyler Crawford, who had witnessed discrimination firsthand and recognized its broader implications. Margaret Foster, the elderly passenger who had spoken up during the confrontation, had published a widely circulated opinion piece titled, "What I Learned at 72 About Privilege in Modern America." Her perspective as a wealthy white woman acknowledging her own blind spots had reached audiences who might have dismissed the same message from other sources. Most meaningful to Jasmine was the letter that had arrived at her office the previous week. Dear Inspector Washington, I'm Amara Johnson, age 14. I saw the video of what happened on that flight. I've always wanted to be a pilot, but sometimes doubted whether someone who looks like me could really succeed in aviation. Watching you stand your ground changed something for me. I've applied for the Young Eagles program and started studying for my ground school tests. Someday, I hope to fly the skies you've helped make fairer for all of us. Thank you for your courage. Franklin Donahue, Jasmine's longtime mentor, had visited her office after the congressional hearing. At 71, he moved more slowly now, but his mind remained sharp as ever. You knew exactly when to show your cards, he'd said with quiet pride, and you played them perfectly. Jasmine's promotion to head. The FAA's new task force on equitable treatment in aviation had come with increased responsibility and visibility. Industry publications now regularly sought her input on regulatory matters, and flight crews recognized her more frequently during her travel, sometimes with trepidation, sometimes with appreciation. 6 months after the audit, Jasmine boarded another flight from Atlanta to Chicago, again in first class. The difference in atmosphere was subtle but unmistakable. The crew moved with a conscious inclusivity, their interactions with all passengers marked by consistent respect rather than variable difference. Captain Elizabeth Chen, now regularly assigned to this route, greeted her by name as she boarded. Always good to have you with us, Inspector Washington. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below. Just as sometimes required being in exactly the right place at the right time, with the right authority and the right determination, she had possessed all four when it mattered most. The beverage service began. The flight attendant, a young black woman named Tanya, the same one who had thanked her 6 months earlier, now moved through the cabin with quiet confidence. "Welcome aboard, Inspector Washington," she said warmly. "It's good to see you again." "It's good to be seen," Jasmine replied simply. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up against discrimination? Or have you witnessed someone else's powerful moment of standing up for what's right? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might inspire others to find their voice in difficult moments. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories of courage and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with one person refusing to move from their rightful place. Thank you for watching, and remember, your seat at the table isn't just about where you sit. It's about changing the table itself for those who come after you. Jasmine Washington's experience teaches us that systemic change often requires both personal courage and institutional authority. When discrimination occurs, the most powerful response isn't always immediate confrontation, but strategic revelation of one's position and capabilities at the right moment. This story illustrates how bias operates not just through individual actions, but through systems that normalize and protect those actions through inadequate reporting mechanisms and accountability structures. The aviation industry's transformation following the audit demonstrates that meaningful change requires addressing root causes rather than symptoms. By targeting the policies that allow discrimination to persist rather than simply punishing one individual, Jasmine created lasting impact across an entire industry. Her story reminds us that justice isn't just about personal vindication, but about reshaping structures to prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. Most importantly, this narrative shows that one person's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment can create openings for others to speak truth to power. When those with privilege and authority acknowledge bias and join efforts for change, transformation becomes possible on a scale that individual resistance alone cannot achieve. Have you witnessed or experienced discrimination that changed how you view systems of power? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about justice and equality. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video to help others understand how everyday courage can create extraordinary change. Thank you for watching, and may we all find the wisdom to know when to show our cards in life's crucial moments.